COP28 Six Themes. It's all about the money. Theme number 3, phasing out fossil fuels. Hi, I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society, and I wanted to walk you through more background information on the climate conference going on right now in Dubai in the UAE. Of course, this is called COP28. It's the 28th time that the countries which are party to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change have met to try and reduce greenhouse gas emissions in order to allegedly stop climate change. In fact, it's really a big climate trade fair and really a fun party for all the climateers. But the problem is, what they decide at this party ends up costing you big bucks, and I want to show you some of the background that's going on. So Robert Lyman has put together these notes, and I'm just going to read them to you in this little presentation. Let's see what he found. So the 6 themes of COP28, we've covered 2 of them already, and this one will be about phasing out fossil fuels, and there will be 3 more segments. So I hope you join us for all 3 of them. The goal of the conference, in terms of phasing out fossil fuels, Robert writes, the conference will seek to add a new set of targets for emissions reduction that are fuel specific. For example, it may seek a global commitment to a 95% decline in coal supply and demand, a 60% decline in oil supply and demand, and a 45% decline in natural gas supply and demand. The new element here is the increased emphasis on phasing out production as though supply and demand were one and the same. And you can see here in Our World in Data, these are the levels of consumption of energy by source in the world up to 2022. So this is traditional biomass. That's like burning wood and dung. A lot of that happens in the developing nations. Coal, you can see, is very popular despite people claiming that, well, coal is dead, we're going to phase it out. Oil continues to grow. Natural gas here in this kind of purple. And then there's nuclear, this kind of turquoise line. The blue is wind. Solar, we can barely see. Modern biofuels and other renewables, that would be like geothermal. Well, as you can see, this is not going to be easy to accomplish unless you want to kill a lot of people. So the factual background. To set the stage for COP28 discussions on this subject, a group of organizations led by the United Nations Environmental Programme and the Canada-based International Institute for Sustainable Development published a 2023 report. It examined what it called the production gap, which it defined as the difference between governments' plans and projections for production of coal, oil, and natural gas, and the levels of production that would be consistent with limiting global warming to a 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius rise. And here I want to say something. Now, there's paper or series of papers called the Guardians of Science, and in it they point out that these targets of 1.5 degrees Celsius and 2 degrees are actually political targets. They're not scientific targets. And many scientists have questioned even the concept of a global average temperature or a global mean temperature anomaly as a way of measuring. Some of these have been referred to in previous things that we've written. You can find a video online where I do a read of Dr. Lindzen and Christie paper regarding the global mean temperature anomaly. And there's a paper online by Christopher Essex and Ross McKittrick and another fellow whose name I can't remember, Andreessen, I think, on is there really even a global temperature? Can it actually be measured? So it's worth considering that these targets, which seem to be written in stone for all of the climateers attending COP28, are actually fictitious political targets. They're not scientific targets. Nothing's going to happen to you if we go over 1.5 or 2 degrees. So, about phasing out fossil fuels, well, let's not be silly. So, countries like China, India, the Russian Federation, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq all see fossil fuel production as central to their economic development and energy security. They are extremely unlikely to commit to production declines, even if governments in countries like the United States, Canada, and Australia were foolish enough to do so. And so you can see here the list of the world's biggest oil producers. This is from 2018. These stayed about the same. You know, there may be a little bit of shifting here in some of the more competitive, closer areas, and you can see why the tar sands campaign, the blocking of pipelines and such like inside Canada, is very effective for all of our competitor nations, because in fact on this list there's only 3 countries that one would deem to be democracies that are producing oil. That would be the USA, Canada, and Brazil. So the rest are very different forms of government, and they're combined. They're in a position to manipulate global energy prices, and energy is what drives modern society. Now, ironically, here's a media backgrounder from Environmental Defense. It's an international environmental organization. In Canada, it's a registered charity, and you can see that this tax subsidized charity is working hard to shut down tax-paying industry and jobs. So you can see that they get money from these mysterious sources, $2 million, $46.92 million, non-receipted donations. Doesn't really sound that charitable to me. I don't know what the net public benefit is for trying to shut down an important industry in Canada, and one that makes it possible for us to live in this terribly cold place. But this backgrounder is worth a read. And again, you see here, they've got to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and avoid catastrophic and irreversible climate change. You hear this over and over again. But in fact, in the geoscientist community, these are geologists and such like, these people study 4.5 billion years of climate history, and they show that, there have been very dramatic swings in temperature over that period of time, caused naturally. And to think that that somehow ended when industrialized society began, and now we're the only factor driving climate change, is totally ludicrous. But that's how all the environmental groups will paint it. You're the problem, you're guilty, you have to pay. So keep that in mind, and maybe look at some of our presentations online. We've got a number of presentations over the past 20 years. They're all recorded, the PowerPoints are there. Now, Robert Lyman points out that developing nations really need affordable fossil fuels. So you can see here that Pakistan, this was in 2022, when natural gas prices started really spiking, they were going to have a gas crisis in the winter. So this is what drives their electrical power. It's a warm country, but you still need power, and you still need some heating and industrial product stream. Natural gas develops a lot of products, especially medical products, plastics, all the things that are vital to modern day society. So he writes that developing countries that are not major fossil fuel producers will also see efforts to reduce fossil fuel supply for what they are. It's an indirect way to increase the price of coal, oil, and natural gas and thereby to leave them and their economic development prospects hostage to an international coalition of globalists, rent seekers, and radical environmentalists. They too will not support measures that harm their interests. So what are the prospects that this fossil fuel phase out will go through at COP28? Robert writes, the European Union, the UN bureaucracy, and some smaller non-oil producing states will attempt to portray reducing fossil fuel production as though it were one and the same as reducing fossil fuel consumption in terms of GHG emissions reduction. And the media will support this effort and endeavor to bring pressure to bear on the OECD countries that are also fossil fuel producers. And you can see here a graph, the 50 countries with the highest CO2 emissions in tons. So this is from the Visual Capitalist. And will the wording be phasing down, phasing out? Robert writes, there will be a prolonged debate about whether the conference communique should endorse phasing down or phasing out fossil fuel production, and about whether that reference should include the word unabated. The debate about whether abated fossil fuel production, that means the production accompanied by CO2 capture and storage, whether that's acceptable may influence federal government policy in Canada and the United States, but it's extremely unlikely to be taken seriously in the other producing countries. This declaration, per se, will have no effects on the production plans of companies in the over 70 countries that produce hydrocarbons. And just to get an idea of what phasing out fossil fuel consumption would mean, this came from Roger PLK Jr. originally from one of his presentations. So in the era of climate diplomacy, global fossil fuel consumption has risen by 57%. So this was up to 2017. A lot of people think that it dropped off radically during lockdowns. It did not. He points out there's roughly 12,000 days until 2050, and the world will use more than 11,000 million tons of oil equivalent energy in 2017. So to reduce global fossil fuel use by 90% plus by 2050 requires the reduction of 1 million tons of oil equivalent, this energy per day, every day until 2050, and we know that's not happening. So he gives an equivalent here of how many different energy production plants that would be in terms of equivalencies. So it would be these replacing an equivalent amount of fossil fuels every day. So we know that's not happening. So again, it's important to look at the past. This is Dubai before oil. That was back in the 50s. And this is Dubai today after oil. So look at that dramatic change, eh? So stay tuned for more. This is the phasing out of fossil fuels. We have 3 more to do. If you like what we're doing, please donate. Please help us do this work. Again, I thank you for joining me on this little video journey to Dubai and back. Again, we're looking at the implications for you as a taxpayer, you as a citizen. It's all about the money at COP28, and they're planning to take a lot more of it from your pocket. And just imagine if Canada phased out fossil fuels in accordance with what the demands are from radical environmentalists, we would lose a huge amount of revenue. The revenues that come into Canada and into Alberta, Saskatchewan, even Quebec. Quebec is a very big revenue generator in terms of oil and gas. The revenues that would be lost, what would replace it? To pay for healthcare, for education, for infrastructure. Where would that equivalent money come from? What product stream could we call on to replace the something like 6,000 different products that come from oil? So think about those things very carefully, because there are serious implications for you in your everyday life from these climate conferences that are taking place far away in another exotic land, a beautiful vacation spot for all the climateers, while you're here paying your carbon taxes, freezing in the dark. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling. Thanks for watching.